My parents said, "You shouldn't ruin your brother's wedding with your presence. Just stay home." I smiled and canceled the $2,500 transfer for their banquet. What they didn't know was that the estate where the wedding was to be held actually belonged to me. Before we continue, let me know, what country are you watching from? Now enjoy the story. Emma had always been the shadow in her own home. It wasn't that anyone deliberately ignored her. It was more like she was invisible, like a familiar piece of furniture or a landscape you no longer notice. Her older brother Ryan was the sun around which the family revolved. He was handsome, charming, successful, or so he appeared to their parents, Margaret and Charles. Every one of his achievements, no matter how trivial, was met with showers of praise and celebration. Emma, by contrast, no matter how hard she worked, could never step out of his light. She did well in school, but that was expected of her. Ryan, on the other hand, would bring home a C and be applauded for trying his best. Emma graduated college with honors, but her parents merely offered a dry "congratulations" before shifting the conversation to Ryan's latest victory at a company bowling tournament. She worked hard, responsibly, reliably, but her contributions to the family were taken for granted. Ryan bounced between jobs, and every time he stumbled, their parents offered financial support and emotional comfort. His failures were always someone else's fault. But Emma didn't envy her brother. Not really. She just wanted to be seen, for her efforts to matter, for her opinions to carry weight, for someone to look her in the eye and acknowledge that she existed. Yet the older she grew, the clearer it became. This would never happen. In their family, there was an unspoken rule. Ryan was the hero, and Emma was the quiet worker, born to uphold his glory. After graduating college, Emma landed a job as a programmer at a small firm. The work was dull, repetitive, not particularly fulfilling, but it paid steadily. Unlike Ryan, who preferred creative pursuits that didn't involve responsibility, Emma knew how to save. She skipped vacations. She avoided buying new clothes, trendy tech, anything unnecessary. All her savings were tucked away in a dedicated account, reserved for a single dream she cherished since childhood. That dream had been born the first time Emma saw an old mansion on the edge of town, a crumbling, abandoned estate with white columns and an overgrown park. It looked like something out of a fairy tale. Even as a child, she imagined restoring it, breathing life into its walls, turning it into a place filled with joy, beauty, and music. The years went by, the mansion continued to decay, but the dream never died. She kept saving. She studied architecture blogs and interior design guides, reading everything she could about historical renovations. And then, the day came. A few years ago, the estate went up for sale. Emma didn't hesitate. She seized the opportunity. She bought the property under her own name, but told no one in her family. She already knew what they'd say, that it was foolish, irresponsible, a waste of money. Ryan would laugh at her. Margaret and Charles would dismiss it, so she kept it secret. After signing the papers, Emma called Robert Harrison, a longtime family friend and an experienced property manager. Robert was a quiet man, practical and loyal. He had known about Emma's dream for years and was happy to help. Together, they made a restoration plan, and little by little, brought it to life. The work was slow but steady. Emma poured every dollar she had into it. Every spare minute was spent overseeing the project. To keep the estate from sitting empty, Robert suggested they rent it out for events, weddings, anniversaries, company retreats. Emma was hesitant at first, but eventually agreed. The rental income helped cover renovation and maintenance costs. And so, Emma lived a double life. By day, she was just another quiet employee in a sea of cubicles. At night and on weekends, she was the mistress of a grand estate, slowly transforming into something beautiful and full of life. No one in her family suspected a thing. They still saw her as the plain girl in the background, And Emma didn't correct them. She liked keeping it to herself. It made her feel strong, independent. She knew the day would come when the truth would matter. And that day was drawing near. Ryan and his fiancée, Madison, chose the estate for their wedding through an event agency, completely unaware of who owned it. Emma found out by accident, going over documents Robert brought her to sign. The agency name, the date, the names of the bride and groom. Everything matched. Her heart gave a quick thump, but she showed no reaction. She was curious to see what would unfold. Not long after, the official invitation arrived. A white envelope, elegant script. Inside, expensive embossed stationery. Emma smirked. A formality. They hadn't even bothered to call her, just mailed it like she was a distant guest at some social gala, not Ryan's sister. Then came the day Margaret, their mother, showed up at her home. Her face was tight, eyes scanning Emma's apartment with silent judgment. Emma offered tea, but Margaret waved it off. "I need to talk to you," she said, perching stiffly on the edge of the couch. "It's about Ryan's wedding. You know how important this is for our family, right?" Emma nodded, knowing full well that important meant looks good to others. "We want everything to go perfectly," Margaret continued, her voice overly measured. "And, well, Emma, you know—" Emma waited. "Here it comes." "In short," Margaret said finally, "we think it would be better if you didn't come." Emma raised her brows, feigning surprise. Deep down, she'd been expecting this. Not come? To Ryan's wedding? Why? Margaret faltered. "Well, the photos, the guests, you tend to blend in. Don't take it personally. You know how Madison is. She's changed her mind. She's particular about appearances. And you don't really enjoy these big events, do you? You'll be happier at home." Emma stared into her mother's eyes. They held no sympathy, only anxiety about keeping the wedding picture perfect. "So," she said slowly, "you think I'll ruin the wedding just by being there?" Margaret flushed. "Not ruin, but you understand. We'll send you pictures, bring you some cake. You won't miss anything." Emma turned to the window so her mother wouldn't see the tears forming. Once again, they were pushing her into the background, making her disappear. And once again, she was about to let them. But not this time. "Okay, Mom," she said quietly, steadying her voice. "I'll stay home." Margaret exhaled, relieved. "Good. I knew you'd understand. You've always been so thoughtful." She left quickly, convinced the issue was settled. Emma remained by the window, staring out at the dull autumn trees. Inside her, a fire had ignited. Anger, pain, resolve. That night, she lay in bed for hours, unable to sleep. Her mother's words echoed in her mind. Enough. No more being pushed aside, no more being used. It was time to show them who she really was. The next morning, just like always, Emma headed to work. Her life hadn't changed on the surface. Same desk, same dull tasks, same quiet lunch in the break room. But inside, something had shifted. There was a strange lightness in her chest, like a door had opened. During her lunch break, she went to the bank and canceled the scheduled transfer of $2,500 that was meant to cover wedding expenses. That money was supposed to help pay for the estate rental and other arrangements. Ryan and Madison had assumed she would help, as she always had. But not this time. This time, they would get nothing. Later that afternoon, Emma called Robert Harrison. "Hello, Robert. It's Emma." "Good afternoon, Miss Bennett," he answered. "Is something wrong?" "Yes, Robert. I need to see you urgently." As expected, Robert didn't ask unnecessary questions. An hour later, he arrived at her office, just as calm and dependable as always. Emma told him everything, about her conversation with her mother and the decision she'd made since. "I need you to cancel the rental agreement for the wedding," she said. "Ryan and Madison can't hold it at the estate." Robert listened without flinching. No raised eyebrows, no questions about morality or revenge. He had known Emma long enough to understand she never acted on impulse. "And the reason?" he asked simply. "Failure to meet the payment terms," she replied. "They didn't make the deposit in time?" Robert nodded. "Understood. When should the termination take effect?" "The morning of the wedding," Emma said. "Let them find out when the guests start showing up." Robert gave her a firm nod and rose from his chair. "It'll be handled exactly as you asked, Miss Bennett." As he walked away, Emma felt her heart pound, not with nerves, but with anticipation. It was finally happening. She was no longer playing along with the family fantasy, no longer letting herself be erased. The wedding day wouldn't be Ryan and Madison's perfect fairy tale. It would be the day the truth came out. That morning, the weather was startlingly beautiful. Sunlight spilling across the rooftops like the sky was in on the joke. Emma awoke feeling clearer than she had in years. She brewed a cup of coffee and sat by her window, watching the quiet courtyard of her modest home. She thought about the contrast, her simple, honest peace, and the carefully curated image her family had spent a lifetime building. At the estate, chaos had already begun. Madison, swishing through the rooms in a silk robe, barked orders at the stylists and florists. Ryan, smug and pleased with himself, received hugs and handshakes from his groomsmen. He joked, he grinned, he promised an unforgettable night. Margaret and Charles fluttered about, anxious but glowing with pride. Everything, they believed, was under control. And then the guests began arriving. Women in heels and feathered hats, men in crisp suits checking their watches, children clutching balloons. Everyone buzzed with excitement, expecting champagne fountains and violin quartets. But instead of a welcome committee, they were greeted by Robert Harrison. His dark suit, calm tone, and serious face stopped the crowd cold. "Good morning," he announced. "I'm sorry to inform you that today's wedding has been cancelled at the request of the property owner." A ripple of confusion spread. Whispers. Frowns. "What do you mean cancelled?" someone cried out. "We were invited." "We apologize for the inconvenience," Robert continued calmly. "The event organizers failed to meet the terms of their rental contract. As a result, the agreement has been terminated." People began to murmur, glancing at each other, unsure whether this was a mistake, a prank, or something far worse. Just then, Ryan stormed into the scene. "What the hell is going on here?" he shouted, marching toward Robert and grabbing his arm. "What do you mean cancelled? Who gave that order?" Robert gently pulled away and met his gaze without flinching. "I'm acting under the direction of the estate's legal owner. Any questions should be directed to them." "The owner? Who the hell is the owner?" Ryan barked. "Where are they? Why hasn't anyone called me?" Margaret and Charles appeared behind him, their faces red with confusion and indignation. "Robert, what's going on?" Margaret snapped. "You know this is our son's wedding." "I'm sorry, ma'am," Robert said coolly, "but I'm only carrying out the wishes of the property owner." "And who exactly is that?" Charles demanded. Robert turned silently and pointed toward the driveway where a car had just pulled in. From the car stepped Emma. The crowd froze. Ryan, Madison, Margaret, Charles. Everyone turned toward her. The color drained from Ryan's face. Margaret's jaw dropped. Madison narrowed her eyes in contempt. "Emma," Ryan muttered, "what are you doing here?" Emma walked calmly toward them, Her dress was simple, her posture confident. Her eyes held no fear, no hesitation, only calm certainty. "I'm here," she said, stopping in front of them, "because I'm the owner of this estate." A silence fell, thick and absolute. The guests, once annoyed, now watched with fascination. Ryan stood there, stunned, mouth slightly open. Madison sneered, but there was a flicker of alarm in her expression. Margaret and Charles looked as if the ground had just shifted beneath them. "You?" Ryan finally said. "You own this place?" "Yes," Emma answered, meeting his eyes. "I bought it years ago. I've been restoring it ever since." "But where did you get the money?" Margaret asked, baffled. "You're just a programmer." "I worked for it," Emma said. "I saved. I said no to myself 1,000 times. I sacrificed everything for this dream." "But why didn't you tell us?" Charles asked. Emma turned toward him, her voice quiet but steady. "Because I knew you wouldn't understand. You've never seen me as someone capable of more. Ryan was always the golden boy, the pride, the hope. And me? I was just the reliable one, the helper, the one who kept things running in the background." Ryan stepped forward, trying to speak, but Emma held up a hand. "Don't, Ryan. You've always been the favorite. I don't even blame you for it anymore, but I won't keep playing the part you've all written for me. I want to be respected for who I am, not for what I can do for you." Up to this point, Madison had been silent, standing off to the side with crossed arms and a face full of disdain. But now she stepped forward, eyes flashing. "And who do you think you are, ruining our wedding like this?" she shouted, her voice sharp and high. "You're just bitter. You're jealous." Emma turned to her calmly, without flinching. "I'm not jealous," she said evenly. "I just want to be left alone. I want nothing to do with people who don't respect me or value me for who I am." "You're going to regret this," Madison screamed, her voice breaking as her perfectly done makeup began to smear. "You'll see how we'll live, and you'll be stuck all alone." "Maybe," Emma replied, voice still calm. "But I'd rather be alone than live in a world of lies and hypocrisy." And with that, she turned and walked back to her car. The crowd parted instinctively, making way for her in stunned silence. Ryan, Margaret, and Charles stood frozen in the middle of the courtyard, humiliated and disoriented. Madison, trembling with rage, stomped her feet like a child and hurled a string of curses into the air. Emma didn't look back. She climbed into her car, started the engine, and slowly drove away from the estate. Robert Harrison met her at the gate. "You did the right thing," he said, nodding firmly. "It was time someone set them straight." Emma smiled faintly. "Thank you, Robert. I couldn't have done it without you." As she pulled away, she looked into the rearview mirror. Guests were already leaving the estate, some angry, some confused, all disappointed. The once festive venue now looked deserted and cold. Her family stood where she had left them, like statues who had just realized they were made of stone. The wedding was ruined. But more than that, the illusion they had all nurtured for years, the fantasy where Emma played the forgettable supporting role, had shattered completely. Shock, anger, disbelief. The air around them was thick with it, like a thunderstorm ready to break. Guests whispered among themselves as they hurried off the grounds, casting curious, pitying, and occasionally judgmental glances at the family at the center of the chaos. Ryan stood alone in the middle of the gravel path, the usual smugness wiped from his face. Now he looked dazed, hollow. The confident groom had vanished. Madison, still in her wedding dress, was a pale and ruined version of herself. Her hair was coming undone, her mascara streaked down her cheeks, her posture crumpled. She no longer resembled the flawless bride she'd envisioned in every photo, every plan. She looked like someone whose world had just come apart. Margaret and Charles, once so composed and in control, were now clinging to each other like frightened children. They watched the departing cars, the empty garden, the guests disappearing down the drive, and finally began to realize the full weight of what had happened. It wasn't just the event that had collapsed, it was their image, their illusion of perfection, their ability to pretend. And from a distance, Robert stood with quiet dignity, observing it all unfold. He knew Emma needed space now, not words. He had done what she asked, and now all he could hope was that she would feel empowered, not just victorious, that she would recognize what she had truly reclaimed, her voice, her life, her sense of self. Back home, Emma sat by the window of her modest little house, watching the late afternoon light fade into gold. She felt strange, empty, and full at the same time. Her heart was racing, yet her hands were steady. Yes, she had wrecked her brother's wedding. Yes, she had embarrassed her parents in front of everyone they knew. But had they not deserved it? Had they ever once stopped to see her? Not as a tool or a helper or a background figure, but as a human being with her own dreams, her own pride. She thought back on all the years spent in Ryan's shadow, his every small success paraded like a trophy, while her achievements were shrugged off or ignored. Ryan is our pride, our future, her parents had always said, and she? Emma was just the assistant, the gray mouse who patched up the cracks and picked up the pieces. She remembered her childhood dreams, the estate, the magic she had imagined living there, the nights she had stayed up poring over floor plans, restoration guides, design ideas, the quiet sacrifices, the skipped vacations, the empty closets, and how she'd hidden it all from her family, knowing full well they would only mock her or dismiss her. And now, that dream was real. She had used it, used the very thing they'd never believed in, to break free. She knew her actions would spark outrage. She knew they would call her cruel, selfish, unforgiving, but she also knew she couldn't go back. She couldn't unsee the truth. She had lived too long under the weight of their expectations. Now she was free, and if they couldn't respect that, then they didn't deserve her at all. It was Margaret and Charles. They stepped out of the car slowly, stiffly, no longer the self-assured parents she had known, but two pale, tired figures whose faces looked older than she remembered. Their shoulders were hunched, their eyes uncertain. "Emma, sweetheart," Margaret called out, her voice trembling. "What have you done?" "You've ruined our lives," she whispered, stepping closer. Emma didn't open the door. She stood in silence, watching them through the glass. "I ruined your lives?" she said at last, her voice low and even. "Did you ever think about how many times you ruined mine?" Charles tried to reach for her hand, but she stepped back. "We've always loved you, Emma," he said. "It's just, Ryan was always different." "Different?" Emma laughed, and it wasn't a kind laugh. He was just better at pretending, and I was always there to clean up after him so you could keep pretending too." Margaret's voice cracked. "But we're family, Emma. Families are supposed to support each other." Emma's eyes didn't soften. "Support," she repeated. "When have you ever supported me? When did you ask me about my work, my dreams, my life? You only saw what you wanted, a daughter who stayed quiet and did what was expected, a sister who made things easier for Ryan." Her parents stood in silence, their heads bowed. "We were wrong," Charles murmured. "We see that now. Please forgive us." Emma let out a slow breath, her voice tired now, not angry, just tired. "I don't know if I can forgive you," she said honestly. "But I do know this. I won't let you use me anymore." Margaret's eyes welled with tears. "But how are we supposed to go on without you? You've always been the one we could count on. You helped with everything." "Then it's time you learned how to stand on your own," Emma replied. "I'm done being your emergency backup plan." And she closed the door, not slammed it, but shut it firmly, finally, with the quiet strength of someone who has nothing left to prove. Inside, she leaned against the wood for a moment, breathing deeply. She could hear her mother crying outside. She could hear Charles's low, helpless voice trying to console her. But she didn't open the door again. Not this time. This time was different. In the days and weeks that followed, Emma's life changed radically. She resigned from her programming job and threw herself fully into running the estate. With Robert Harrison's help, she developed a new strategy, opened the estate to a wider variety of events, and attracted a better clientele. Slowly, the business began to thrive. Word spread. The estate wasn't just some restored old building. It was a place with a soul, a sanctuary. And at the heart of it was a woman who had built it all from scratch, with no support but her own strength and stubbornness. Ryan and Madison tried reaching out. They sent messages, left voicemails, even offered money. They begged for forgiveness, for a second chance, for understanding. But Emma never replied. She had nothing left to give them, not after the way they had treated her. Her parents, too, made several attempts. They called daily at first, then weekly. They left letters at her door. But Emma didn't answer. She knew that even the smallest gesture, the tiniest sign that she still cared, would be enough for them to creep back in. And she wasn't going to let that happen. Eventually, the silence sank in. Margaret and Charles stopped calling. They stopped writing. They finally understood. Emma wasn't just angry. She was gone. And in that quiet, Emma found peace. She discovered what it was like to wake up without the weight of someone else's expectations on her chest. What it felt like to make decisions without looking over her shoulder. She surrounded herself with people who valued her not for what she could do for them, but for who she was. She traveled. She explored. She laughed, loudly, freely, for the first time in years. She sat beneath the oak trees in her estate's garden and felt the breeze on her face, the sun on her skin. She breathed without apology. The estate wasn't just a business anymore. It had become a symbol of freedom, of independence, of self-respect. Emma had poured her soul into those walls, and in return, they gave her something she'd never had before: pride. Sometimes, as the sun dipped low over the garden and shadows danced across the gravel paths, she thought of her family. There was no anger left in her, just a quiet sadness, not for what she lost, but for what they never saw, for the daughter they overlooked, the sister they underestimated, the woman they pushed aside until she no longer needed them. But she knew she had made the right choice. She had chosen herself, her freedom, her voice. And that, more than anything else, was what mattered. Emma began to rebuild her life on her own terms. For the first time, every choice she made was hers, and hers alone. She no longer woke up dreading conversations where she would be overlooked, interrupted, dismissed. There were no more backhanded compliments, no more polite exclusions from family events disguised as concern, no more being a silent extra in someone else's story. She was writing her own story now, and it was beautiful. She learned to value her own company, to enjoy quiet mornings with coffee and long walks through the estate grounds, hearing the crunch of gravel beneath her feet, feeling the wind tug gently at her hair. She learned to appreciate the stillness that came with solitude, to honor the peace she had carved out of years of being silenced. She also began letting others in, but on her terms. The new team at the estate respected her vision. They listened, they asked for her input, and trusted her decisions. For the first time, Emma wasn't the one making things easier for everyone else. Others made things easier for her. She was finally treated like someone whose presence mattered. She expanded the estate's services, adding seasonal events, private retreats, even artist residencies. People came not only for weddings, but to find inspiration, restoration, and joy. The mansion had become a reflection of Emma herself, strong, elegant, transformed. And slowly, word began to spread beyond the region. Journalists reached out for interviews. Blogs featured her story. "The quiet woman who rebuilt a dream," one headline read. Another called her the sister who chose silence and found power. Emma never sought fame, but she wasn't afraid of being seen anymore. She was no longer the gray mouse. She had become the architect of her own life. As seasons passed, her story reached even those who had tried so hard to keep her invisible. One day, she received a letter, not from her parents, nor from Ryan or Madison. It was from a young woman she didn't know, a reader, someone who had followed her story online. "You gave me courage," the letter said, "to walk away from a family that only loved the version of me that kept quiet. Thank you for reminding me that I deserve to be seen too." Emma read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and placed it in a drawer beside her bed. That night, she slept deeply, peacefully, not because everything was perfect, but because she had stopped betraying herself to keep the peace. And that was enough. Sometimes, when the garden was quiet and golden with sunset, she would pause to reflect. Her family had faded from her life. They no longer called, no longer wrote. They had perhaps finally accepted that she wouldn't come back, that she wouldn't resume the role they had assigned her. She had made her choice, and maybe one day she would forgive them completely. But even if she didn't, she had already freed herself from their approval. She didn't need them to validate her journey. She had lived it, built it, survived it. And no one, not her parents, not her brother, not her critics, could ever take that away. The mansion stood behind her like a quiet monument to everything she had endured, everything she had created. It was no longer crumbling or forgotten. It was alive, full of color, of light, of laughter, and music. Just like she had imagined when she was a little girl pressing her face to its rusted gates. She had brought it back to life, and in doing so, she had brought herself back to life. No longer a shadow, no longer small. She had chosen herself, and that choice had changed everything. This was only the beginning.